The night Wren Calloway found out she'd been assigned to the Blackthorn table, she almost called in sick. It wasn't the first time a private booking had made her stomach drop. Working banquet service at the Meridian in downtown Miami meant you learned fast. Which names on the reservation sheet came with weight attached? Politicians who expected you to disappear between courses. Tech billionaires who snapped their fingers without looking up. The occasional celebrity who treated the dining room like a stage and the staff like scenery. But Blackthorn was different. Even Wren, who'd only been at the Meridian for 14 months, knew that. Table 12. Her supervisor, Carlos, had said that afternoon during setup, not meeting her eyes. Full buyout, 8 guests, private entrance, no other tables on that side of the floor. Who is it? Carlos had straightened a fork that was already straight. Just keep the glasses filled and don't ask questions you don't need the answers to. That was answer enough. She'd gone home after her morning shift, slept 3 hours, showered, and stood in front of her bathroom mirror longer than she usually allowed herself. The Meridian's uniform was white and navy, a fitted vest over a collared shirt, dark trousers. It fit her the way clothes always fit her body, stretched at the shoulders, gapping slightly at the buttons, designed by someone who'd never once considered that women who wore size 22 also needed to look professional. She'd sewn a small pleat into the back of the vest herself, months ago, because the alternative was spending money she didn't have. She pinned her name tag to the lapel and told herself it was just another night. She was wrong. The Blackthorn party arrived at 7:45, which meant they were early, which meant Wren was still arranging the last of the bread service when the private entrance clicked open and the air in the room changed. She heard them before she saw them. Not loud. The opposite of loud, actually. That particular quiet that came with men who didn't need to announce themselves. The kind of quiet that had weight. There were 7 of them, 3 in front, moving in a loose formation that was almost too casual, the kind of casual that was practiced. 2 more flanking. Then, behind all of them, the man Wren understood immediately was the reason for the private entrance. The full buyout, the 3 layers of security she'd clocked on her way in through the service corridor. He was tall, not in the way that read as accidental, the way some men were just tall, and carried it awkwardly. This was deliberate height, the kind that came with a posture built over decades. 40, maybe a few years past it, with the kind of face that had earned its angles, a hard jaw, dark eyes set under a brow that suggested a permanent mild assessment of everything in front of him. His suit was charcoal, no tie, collar open 1 button. On anyone else it might have read as Casual Friday. On him, it read as I stopped caring what you think about a very long time ago. Wren had a rule about not staring at guests. She broke it for approximately 4 seconds, then picked up the breadbasket and walked to the table. "Good evening," she said. "Welcome to the Meridian. I'm Wren, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with still or sparkling water?" The man at the head of the table she'd already understood he would sit at the head didn't look at her. He was scanning the room. Not suspiciously, the way people did in movies. Just efficiently, the way a person checks a space they've been in before and want to confirm is the same space. One of the men beside him, younger, broad-shouldered, with a scar that curved up from his jawline, glanced at Wren, sparkling all around. She nodded and moved. It went like that for the first 40 minutes. She poured. She brought the first course. She answered a question about the catch of the day from one of the younger men, who seemed genuinely curious and almost friendly. She refilled glasses. She stayed at the edge of the room when she wasn't actively needed, which was where she preferred to be. Then the phones came out. Not everyone's, just 2 of them, one of the men on the left side of the table and the tall man at the head. There was a shift in the conversation. A drop in volume. The other guests seemed to receive some invisible signal and fell into their own quieter exchanges, creating a bubble of relative privacy around the 2 men with the phones. Wren was clearing a side plate 3 feet away when she heard it. Not English, not Spanish, which she could have followed well enough to catch the shape of. Something else, fluid and guttural and almost rhythmic in a way that reminded her of music heard through a wall. Russian. She didn't react. Her hands kept moving. The plate went onto the tray. She reached past the younger man to retrieve a salad fork he'd finished with, the same way she would have reached for any fork at any table. The man at the head of the table, she'd heard one of the others call him Cade, though whether that was a first name or a last name she couldn't tell. Said something to his associate in a low voice. The associate made a sound of agreement. Then Cady said, in the same language, the same calm register, "She's too big to be real staff. They probably put her here because she looks slow. She won't understand a word." The salad fork in Wren's hand was cold. Her tray was balanced on her left palm. She was 2 feet from the man who had just said it. Her Russian wasn't perfect. It hadn't been, even when she was 12 years old and her grandmother, Olena Shevchenko, who had never fully learned English despite living in Cleveland for 30 years, was the one teaching it to her in their apartment kitchen over tea and cards. But Wren had been raised half in that language, had dreamed in it sometimes, had read the books her grandmother left behind when she died. She knew enough. She knew exactly enough. She set the tray down on the side station. She turned back to the table. She picked up the water pitcher, moved around to the far side, and began refilling glasses from the left, the way you were supposed to. When she reached Cade's glass, she poured carefully, the way she'd been trained. Then she set the pitcher down on the linen, and, in Russian, unhurried, conversational, the way her grandmother used to correct her accent, she said, "I understand you well enough, and for the record, real staff doesn't mean fast or slow. It means invisible. You might want to remember that the next time you discuss business in front of someone you've already decided can't hear you." The table went silent. Not the polite silence of a pause in conversation, the specific silence of a room where everyone has stopped breathing at the same time. Cade looked up at her. He had the kind of stillness that was more dangerous than movement. He didn't startle. His face didn't do anything theatrical. No jaw drop, no flushing, so visible anger. No. He just looked at her the way someone looks at a door. They were certain was locked and has turned not to be, and has turned out. The associate with the scar had gone rigid. 2 of the men across the table had exchanged a look Wren couldn't fully read. She held Cade's gaze. Her heart was doing something unpleasant behind her sternum, but her hands weren't shaking, and she'd made a decision approximately 2 seconds ago to see this through to the other side of it. "Is there anything else I can bring you before the next course?" she asked, in English this time the way she would have asked anyone. Cade said nothing for 3 full seconds. Then, "Sit down." Wren blinked. "There's an empty chair." He nodded toward the seat at the near end of the table, angled slightly away from the cluster of his men. "Sit down." "I'm working, Mr. Blackthorne," he said, "and I'm aware you're working. Sit down anyway." She was aware of 2 things simultaneously, that she should decline, and that declining was not actually a realistic option in this room, with these men at this table. She pulled the chair out and sat. She kept her back straight. She put her hands in her lap. Cade studied her with the same efficient attention he'd given the room when he walked in. "Where did you learn, my grandmother?" "From where?" "Kharkiv." Something shifted in his expression, not warmth exactly, but a kind of recalibration. "You grew up speaking it?" "Until I was 15, then I mostly stopped. I read it more than I speak it." "Your accent is regional, northern. She was from the north." Wren paused. "I didn't know I still had the accent." Cade leaned back slightly. The tension in the room had shifted, not gone, but redistributed. The men around the table were watching with varying degrees of discomfort, and something that, in some of them, looked almost like suppressed amusement. "What did you hear?" Cade asked. His tone was neutral in a way that wasn't casual. It was a genuine question with a real weight beneath it. Wren considered her answer. Enough to know you weren't discussing the menu. And I have a very good memory, which is something you also might want to keep in mind. The associate with the scar made a sound that was either a cough or a laugh that he'd stopped partway through. One of the men across the table pressed his mouth flat in a way that suggested he was doing the same. Cade didn't look away from her. "You're not afraid, I didn't say that. You're sitting here, you told me to sit here." The corner of his mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile. It was the shape of one, briefly before it receded. "What's your name?" "Wren." "Wren what?" "Calloway." He repeated it once quietly, like he was checking the weight of it. "How long have you worked here, Wren Calloway?" 14 months. Before that, hospital cafeteria. Before that, a hotel in Fort Lauderdale. Before that, I was in school. She stopped herself. She wasn't sure why she'd offered all of that. It had come out in the cadence of the question, like answering honestly was a reflex she hadn't trained out of herself yet. Cade tilted his head slightly. "What were you studying?" "Linguistics. I didn't finish." "Why not?" "Money." The word came out flat, not self-pitying. "Just a fact. My mother got sick. I came home. It's not a complicated story." He was quiet for a moment. The room held its breath around them. "You have 3 languages?" he asked. 4. English, Russian, Spanish, and a little bit of Mandarin. The Mandarin is bad. I wouldn't claim it, but you'd understand a conversation. Depends on the topic and how fast they talk. Cade looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the associate on his right. Not the scar, the other one, older, silver-haired, with the watchful patience of a man who had been second in command for a very long time. Something passed between them. The kind of communication that didn't require words. Cade looked back at Wren. "I have a position," he said, "not in a restaurant." She stared at him. "You're offering me a job." "I'm describing a position that exists. What you do with that information is your business." "What kind of position?" "The kind that requires someone who can follow a conversation in multiple languages, without the other party knowing they're being understood." "And who is?" He paused, and something in the pause was deliberate. "Discreet. You just found out about my discretion 5 minutes ago. I found out that you held the information until the moment you decided to use it," he said. "That's a specific kind of discreet. It's the useful kind." Wren was aware of her pulse in her wrists, her throat. She was also aware that this was the strangest conversation she'd had in her adult life, that she was sitting at a table with men she was fairly certain were not in a legal line of business, and that the man across from her had 15 minutes ago casually dismissed her as furniture and was now looking at her like a problem he was interested in solving. "The thing you said," she said, "earlier in Russian." His expression didn't change. "I said it." "I know you said it. I'm asking if you'd like to say something else about it." The older associate made a quiet sound. Several of the men around the table became very still, in the way people become still when they want to watch something without appearing to watch it. Cade held her gaze. She had the feeling he wasn't used to being asked direct questions that assumed accountability. She also had the feeling he was deciding, in real time, how to handle that. "I was wrong," he said finally. The words were simple, and he said them the way he said everything, without decoration. "I made an assumption based on incomplete information. I don't usually do that." "No, it's an inefficient habit." The corner of his mouth moved again. "Clearly." Wren let the silence sit for a moment. Then she said, "I'll think about the position." "Think fast," he said. "We leave Miami on Thursday." She stood, pushed the chair back in, straightened her vest. "I have a table to finish serving." "You do," he agreed. She walked back to the side station. She picked up the water pitcher. She refilled the glass of the man nearest her without her hands shaking once. She did not sleep that night. She lay in her apartment in Hialeah with the ceiling fan going and her phone on her chest, and she replayed the conversation the way you replay a car accident. Not because you want to, but because your brain refuses to move past it until it has processed every angle. The smart thing, obviously, was to forget it. To go back to the Meridian tomorrow, work her shift, make her tips, keep her head down. She was good at keeping her head down. She'd been doing it since she was 16, taking her first job at a diner 2 bus rides from home so her mother could keep the electricity on, and she'd gotten very efficient at that particular posture. But she kept thinking about the way he'd looked at her when she'd spoken in Russian. Not the insult before it. She'd filed that away in the part of her mind where she put things that hurt but didn't need to be examined right now. The moment after, the complete reorientation of his attention. She'd spent most of her life being the person in the room that people looked past. Not dramatically, not cruelly, just past. She was the size that made people's eyes slide off to something more comfortable. She was the income bracket that didn't get taken seriously. She was the woman who dropped out of college, who waitressed, who sent half her paycheck to her mother's prescriptions. Nobody had ever looked at her the way Cade Blackthorne had looked at her in that 40-second silence after she'd spoken, like a door that had turned out to be unlocked. She called the number at 6 in the morning. She wasn't sure how she had it. One of the men had placed a card on the table at the end of the evening, and she'd palmed it without entirely deciding to. A Miami exchange. No name. The phone rang once. "Calloway," said the voice on the other end. Not a question. She hadn't expected him to answer personally. She recovered quickly. "You know I'd call at 6 in the morning." "I expected some time before 8, Cade said. "You're more decisive than I gave you credit for, or I didn't sleep. Those aren't mutually exclusive." She stood at her kitchen window with a cup of bad coffee and watched the sky go pale over the apartment complex across the street. "I have conditions. State them. I want to know what I'm walking into. Not everything. I'm not naive, but enough to make an informed decision." A brief pause. "Reasonable. I want a salary, not cash, not favors. A real number deposited into a real account. Also reasonable. And if I hear something that makes me want to leave, I leave." This pause was longer. "Define complications, the kind that involves me not being able to leave." "I don't operate that way," he said. His voice was the same as it had been in the rest-on level without effect. "I have no use for people who stay against their will. It's counterproductive." Wren drank her bad coffee. "You say that like it's a business principle." "It is." "That's either reassuring or horrifying." "Probably both," Cade had said. "Are you in?" Wren looked out the window at the pale sky. She thought about her mother's last medical bill, still sitting on the kitchen counter, because she couldn't figure out which part of her paycheck it was supposed to come from. She thought about her grandmother's kitchen, tea and cards and Russian lessons, a woman who had crossed an ocean with nothing and made something anyway. She thought about the way Cade Blackthorne had said I was wrong, like it was just a fact, without theatrics, without making it her job to make him feel better about it. "I'm in," she said. The next 6 weeks were the strangest of her life. The position turned out to be exactly what he'd described, attending meetings, dinners, social events where multiple languages were in play, and noting what was said in the conversations that weren't meant to be heard. She wasn't a spy. He'd been very clear about that distinction, in a way that she suspected was meaningful. She didn't carry anything. She didn't report to anyone but Cade. She sat in rooms, listened, and afterward gave him an account of what she'd understood. She was introduced as his assistant. Nobody questioned it. Nobody looked at her the way she'd half expected, sizing her up against the role, wondering what qualified her, dismissing her the way she'd been dismissed her whole life. The men around Cade treated her with a professional neutrality that she eventually realized was its own form of respect. Was its own dismiss. You didn't survive in Cade Blackthorne's orbit by being careless about his organizational choices. She sat in on a dinner in Coral Gables, where 3 men from a Venezuelan shipping company spent 40 minutes discussing, in Spanish, their concerns about a container inspection scheduled for the following week, never realizing that the quiet woman at the end of the table who kept her eyes on her plate was following every word. She attended a meeting at a hotel bar where a pair of Eastern European men, comfortable in their own language, revealed the name of the official who'd sold them information they were now leveraging. She sat across a conference table from a man from Hong Kong who spent 20 minutes in Mandarin describing the thing he actually wanted from this negotiation, which was not the thing he was saying aloud in English, which was not the thing he was. Wren had always thought of her languages as an accident of her biography. Her grandmother's stubborn refusal to let English replace everything. The hospital where she'd done her mother's intake paperwork, alongside a Spanish-speaking nurse who'd been kind enough to coach her through it, the Mandarin she'd picked up from her college roommate, and a half semester of a class she'd loved, and then had to drop. Katie treated them like a skill set that had been waiting for the right application. They had dinner together, the two of them, for the first time at the end of the third week. Not a work dinner, a separate thing, quiet and strange, at a small restaurant near Coconut Grove that had no valet and terrible acoustics, and the best ceviche she'd had in her life, he asked. About her grandmother, she told him more than she intended to. He told her that his mother had been born in Odessa, which explained his ease with the language, and that he hadn't spoken to her in 12 years, which he said without visible emotion, but which Wren filed carefully. She told him about dropping out. About the morning she'd gotten the call from the hospital and gone home to Orlando on a bus with one bag, knowing she wasn't going back. He listened the way he did everything, completely, without the subtle restlessness that most people showed when someone else was talking about something hard. You didn't resent it, he said. I resented the situation, she said. Not her. That's a distinction most people don't make. She's my mother. Wren said it simply. It was simple. Cade looked at her across the table. He did that sometimes. That specific quality of attention that was not quite scrutiny and not quite softness and sat precisely in between. You're not like the people I usually have around me. That's probably obvious, Wren said, which was not the response she'd planned but came out anyway. I mean it as an observation, he said, not complaint. She looked back at him. The restaurant was noisy around them, families and couples, and a table of loud college students in the corner, the whole ordinary machinery of civilian life grinding along. Cade Blackthorne looked slightly alien in it, the way a hawk looks alien at a bird feeder. Technically the same species of environment, fundamentally the wrong creature. You know, she said, most people, when they've said something about someone that they shouldn't have, they avoid the subject. You brought it up again. I prefer to address things directly. You said you were wrong. I was. You're not embarrassed by that. He considered this. I'm rarely embarrassed by information, he said. Being wrong is information. It updates the model. What model? The one I was running on you. He picked up his drink. It was inadequate. It's been revised. Wren looked at him for a long moment. What does the revised version say? He met her eyes. The restaurant noise continued all around them, indifferent, that you are someone who pays attention in rooms where you're assumed not to, that you make decisions without announcing them, that you don't perform your own discomfort for the benefit of the people who caused it. He set down his glass, and that you're very good at your job. Wren felt something in her chest that she was not entirely ready to examine. She looked down at her ceviche. Thank you, she said, which seemed insufficient, but was what she had. I don't say things to be gracious, Cade said. I say them because they're accurate. I know, she said, and she did. It wasn't linear after that. It rarely was. There were evenings where he was distant in a way that felt like weather, impersonal, not directed at her, just present. There were meetings where she watched him operate from across a room and understood, fully for the first time, what he was. Not the soft version that was easy to sit across from at a Sevish restaurant in Coconut Grove, but the other thing, the one his men deferred to, the one whose calm was the specific calm of someone who had made decisions that couldn't be undone and had learned to carry them. She didn't pretend that wasn't real. She didn't flatten it or look away from it. She'd been raised by a woman who'd survived real things, who'd taught her that the world contained genuine danger, and that the answer to that was not naivety but accuracy, knowing exactly what you were looking at, naming it correctly, and deciding what you did with that information. She decided. Not all at once. Over weeks, over small moments. A hand on her back, briefly, in the hallway outside a meeting. His voice on the phone at 11 at night, asking a question that didn't need to be asked at 11 at night when an email would have served. The way he listened when she talked about her grandmother, like the information was precious to him for reasons he didn't choose to explain. The night it shifted from unspoken to spoken, they were on the balcony of a rental house in Key Largo, and the water was dark and close, and she told him what she'd been thinking about the previous weeks. Not the whole of it, but enough. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I should tell you that this isn't simple." "I know what you do," she said. "That's not the same as living alongside it. I'm already living alongside it." He looked at her. The water moved below them, quiet and black. "You could still leave," he said. "The offer stands. No complications. I know it stands." She looked back at him. "I'm not leaving Blackthorn, who ran the most structured criminal organization between Miami and Atlanta, who had never in Wren Calloway's observation shown evidence of being uncertain about anything, was quiet for almost 10 seconds. Then he reached across the space between them and took her hand. Not dramatically, not like a man in a movie, just carefully, the way a person handles something they've decided matters to them. "All right," he said. Months later, Wren sat in the back of an armored car moving north on I-95, with Cade beside her and a folder of meeting notes in her lap that contained, among other things, a record of 6 conversations that had just become very important to 3 different federal investigations that Cade was, for reasons she now understood well, navigating with extreme precision. She thought about the night in the restaurant, the insult she'd let land without reacting, the moment she'd chosen to respond, the gamble she hadn't fully named to herself until after it had already been made. Her grandmother had told her once, over tea and cards at the kitchen table in Cleveland, that the most powerful thing a woman could be was accurately seen, not admired, not desired. Seen clearly. Honestly, for exactly what she was. Wren looked out the window at the dark highway. She looked at Cady beside her, reading something on his phone, unhurried. She thought about a woman from Kharkiv who had crossed an ocean with nothing and made something anyway, who had taught her the language of her blood in a kitchen that smelled like black tea and old wood, who had believed, without saying it in those words, that a woman's full self was worth the trouble of learning. She'd been carrying that her whole life, that inheritance, quiet and heavy in her chest. She didn't have to carry it quietly anymore.